Everybody, it's Brian Shannon from alphatrends.net. Today's Friday, the 28th of August, 2020, and we had another major up move for the market. The NASDAQ gained 7.5% just this week, now up 37.5% year to date. Biotechs continue to be a little bit weak, and as do the energy names. Let's take a look at the chart. This is a 15-minute chart. Each one of these candles is 15 minutes. This is the beginning of the week right here on the 24th, of course, and I always use a week-to-date volume-weighted average price just to kind of see where we are for the week. And obviously, we closed well above that as this market continues to make new all-time highs, and again, zero sign of a so-called double top. The path of least resistance is higher, and that's where we continue to give the benefit of the doubt to the buyers. You can look at this market and say it's up on light volume. You can say this is diverging or this doesn't make sense. But the fact is, the only thing that needs to make sense is price action, because only price pays. So next week, I think that, again, we're innocent until proven guilty. We're a little bit extended. First level I would be looking for as potential support is about 346. And I update this each and every day for subscribers. So if you're interested in, day-by-day commentary, alphatrends.net. The NASDAQ started off on a gap higher and a little bit of profit taking on Monday, but then the buyers got back above that week-to-day volume-weighted average price, and it was up and away. Today was, still higher, but an inside day. An inside day simply means that today's low was higher than yesterday's low, and today's high was lower than yesterday's high. So all of today's range occurred within the range of the previous day. A lot of times that comes near a short-term turning point, but it's not something I would trade off of. I would look at it and say that's something to be aware of, but not concerned. 288.5 is our first level of importance going into next week. The Russell 2000 continues to bang away at the volume-weighted average price off of this date on the 11th, that is, and it made it up through there today. So it was kind of a choppy week as this market was, back and forth above and below the volume-weighted average price. Today, it made that higher high above the flat to rising 5-day moving average. So now we've bounced from the 20-day moving average in that prior band of resistance, and it looks like the Russell 2000 might finally be able to continue to, show some upside potential here. That's the prior low and high. If we can get up through there, maybe we start heading in towards this gap area. The semiconductors closed on a weekly basis at an all-time high and on a daily basis as well. You can see that on Thursday we had a little bit of selling. It's amazing when you watch Twitter and how people get so panicked about one day of selling when we've got this ginormous uptrend, and it continues to ride that rising 20-day moving average. I wouldn't be concerned about these things at all until it starts closing below that 20-day and the 20-day starts to turn lower. The biotechs, as we noted last week, breaking a trend line does not mean that the trend has changed. It means that the rate of descent has slowed and the path of least resistance continues to be lower. We're below the volume-weighted average price off of that peak. This has been an important level here in the near term. Looking at getting above that 133.5-ish next week might lead to some further upside, but when you put it against what we see on the daily time frame, we've still got a declining 20 and 50-day moving average. So certainly it makes more sense to me, at least, to look at other areas where you don't have the potential for that supply overhead so close by. The financials last week coming into, last Friday, that is, I said that these were a waste of time. Well, look what happened. We gapped up on Monday. We rallied and made, the 5-day moving average flattened out. We started to see higher highs and higher lows, and the buyers took back control. We're heading up to that 200-day moving average, and beyond that, who knows where we could go from here. I mentioned these stocks, but I don't trade them. I'm not interested in the financial stocks. To me, they're slow, boring stocks, but they're behaving well right now. The 200-day moving average, the fact that it's declining, tells me that it's likely not going to have a huge move higher from here. So just for whatever that's worth. Last week, some of the names we spoke about still involved in this GoDaddy. This one just continues to grind higher. I had mentioned NCR. This one has, this is what I was showing subscribers this week, is maybe we have an inverted head and shoulders pattern. We got above the volume weighted average price from the peak. We didn't purchase it here because it was extended. And now going into next week, I think that it looks good. We actually purchased this one today. Shares of Pinterest got involved in this one today. A lot of people have been looking at Pinterest, and they got shaken out on Monday, I think, Friday and Monday of last week, Friday of last week and Monday of this week. Today, we saw a higher high above the flat to rising 5-day moving average. We are above the volume weighted average price from the earnings report as well as from this peak. And here's our week to date. So Pinterest to me looks like if you can, purchase it in this area, or maybe it pulls back down in somewhere like this, then perhaps you could purchase it in here. And at this time, a worst case stop for me goes just under $34 per share. A couple other names beyond this one continues to behave very well technically. If you look at what we've been looking at, that is the volume weighted average price from the IPO, from the all-time high and from this low, have held as support. Now we're right at a declining 50-day moving average, and next week we're going to start to see that 50-day moving average start to flatten out. June 18th was 50 days ago, so we're going to start getting rid of this data next week. That means as we replace it with this data in the next 5 to 7 days, that 5-day moving average is going to flatten out. So we want to start looking at this as maybe it's getting ready for a much bigger move. This prior band of resistance holding as support. We've got a 20-week moving average there. We've got all those volume weighted average price levels that I had mentioned. And now here's a 5, 10, and 20-day moving average. Don't pay so much attention to that, but the volume weighted average price off of the peak, we saw, it rallied right up to that on the earnings report. We've discussed that previously. And then this week, we got beyond the volume weighted average price from that, and now that's holding as a place where buyers are gaining control. What I think is most likely the best scenario to buy shares of Beyond, or you could buy them in here with a stop underneath, let's say, Wednesday's low, or you could maybe, I think it's likely to do something like this, create a higher low, and then the big move comes. But right now, you could argue that it's very low risk, and maybe you want to purchase it in that area. A couple other names I'm going to have an eye on next week. Ballard Power. This one is finally starting to, there's the volume weighted average price off of the peak. And if we look at that on a 30, well, let's look at a 65-minute time frame so it's not so scrunched up. Let's look at it here on this, like I said, the 65-minute time frame. It was declining, and we got up to and through that briefly this week. Now what we're going to look for is something like this next week. And if it can do that, I think that shares of Ballard Power have a good chance of running up towards $19 to $20 next week. Shares of NVTA, this one, here's a weekly chart. It's up against all-time highs. The 30-minute time frame, you can see, well, let's again go to the 65-minute time frame, because you can see the volume weighted average price from this peak is now held as a place where buyers were found this week. That's also approximately the volume weighted average price from the recent low. So I think on a 15-minute time frame here, you look at this chart and probably getting above this little band of resistance, it could see it get going. And right now, at least with the information we have, we'd say a stop would go underneath that level. TWOU is another one I've got an eye on for next week. The one thing is that the 20-day moving average is declining. Not a big deal really, but when you look at the weekly time frame, let's take a look at the volume weighted average price off the all-time high. Well, at that, notice how that volume weighted average price, as it was declining, was where we found supply. And then it flattened out, and now we're seeing buyers emerge and hold that prior resistance as support. So over to the daily time frame, what are our key levels here? Well, we could put a volume weighted average price off of this low, but it's not relevant. So we put one off this gap, and you can see that that has held as the place where buyers are found this week. Now, what is it? Do we want to buy pullbacks? No, we want to buy a stock after a pullback and the buyers regain control. Regain control from where? from the most recent event where the sellers took control, and that's that gap down. So since that gap lower right here, and this is a 30-minute time frame, you can see that the stock is up against that volume weighted average price right now, that it had been resistance over here, resistance, and very similar to what we're seeing on the weekly chart, I think we have a fractal situation setting up. And what I'd like to see would be just a little bit of a pullback, and then to buy a break above this volume weighted average price, and then set a stop underneath whatever that higher low ends up being. Maybe you want a tighter, looser stop right down perhaps near $39 per share. Anyway, there's a couple ideas for you to take a look at next week. It's amazing this market continues to offer low risk, high probability setups, and that's my job. That's what I do every single day for subscribers at Alpha Trends. Have a good weekend.